"Mommy says I should call you Daddy," said the beggar woman's son to the millionaire. And in that one moment, everything he thought he buried came crashing back. He left love behind for success. But now, a barefoot boy, holding nothing but a drawing and a name, might just expose the secret he never knew existed. The woman he abandoned, now homeless. The child, possibly his own. But why did she hide it all these years? And what will he do when the truth finally stands at his doorstep, calling him Daddy? Will he run from the past again or fight to become the man they both need now? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The 5 a.m. alarm sliced through the silence of Robert Langford's penthouse. He opened his eyes instantly. No snoozing, no lingering. Efficiency was everything. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, the city's lights twinkled below like fallen stars against the pre-dawn darkness. His kingdom, in a way. Robert swung his feet onto the polished hardwood floor. 60 seconds later, he stood in his glass-walled shower, hot water cascading over his shoulders. 7 minutes for showering, 3 minutes to shave. His morning routine, perfected over years, ran like the algorithms that had made him rich. At exactly 5:45 a.m., Robert sat at his kitchen island, drinking black coffee and scrolling through overnight market reports on his tablet. The penthouse gleamed with modern furniture, chrome, and glass, everything in its place. Nothing personal, no photos, no mementos, just clean lines and empty spaces. "Schedule today?" he asked his smart speaker. "You have the Vertex investor meeting at 9 a.m., lunch with the board at 12:30, conference call with Tokyo at 3 p.m., the electronic voice replied. Robert nodded to himself. Another day of deals and decisions. Another day of being Robert Langford, tech visionary. The man who had everything. Everything except someone to share it with. The thought ambushed him, unwelcome and irritating. He pushed it away and gulped his coffee. His phone buzzed. Clara Williams, his assistant. Always early, always prepared. "Good morning, Mr. Langford. Mark is ready downstairs whenever you are. I've sent the final presentation slides to your email and prepared the folders for the board meeting." "Thank you, Clara. I'll be down in 10. Robert adjusted his tie in the mirror, a perfect Windsor knot. His reflection stared back. A handsome man in an impeccable suit, not a hair out of place. But something in his eyes looked hollow. Empty. For a moment, he was somewhere else. A cramped apartment with mismatched furniture. The smell of cheap coffee and the sound of laughter. "You're going to change the world someday, Robert Langford, I just know it." Isabel. Her voice, warm and sweet, echoed across the years. Her smile had been like sunshine, her faith in him unshakable. Robert blinked and the memory vanished. He hadn't thought about Isabel in... how long? Years, probably. They'd been so young, so foolish. He'd been broke then, jumping from one dead-end job to another, sleeping on friends' couches when he couldn't make rent. And then there was Isabel Moreno with her tiny apartment and big dreams who'd taken him in, who'd believed in him when no one else did. His phone buzzed again, yanking him back to the present. A notification from Clara. Mail sorted. One item requiring attention. Letter from Mothers Supporting Mothers Charity Foundation. Donation request. Robert frowned. Another charity looking for handouts. He'd delete it later. Grabbing his briefcase, he headed for the elevator. In the lobby, Mark waited beside the black town car, door already open. "Good morning, Mr. Langford. Big day today." "Every day is big, Mark," Robert replied, sliding into the leather back seat. As the car pulled away, Robert opened his laptop, pushing away thoughts of the past. He had an empire to run. No time for ghosts. Robert stared out the car window as skyscrapers slid by, but his mind wandered back 13 years. Back to a cramped one-bedroom apartment with peeling wallpaper and a radiator that clanked through winter nights. Back to Isabel. She'd been 22 then, working 2 jobs, waitressing during days and proofreading for a small publisher at night. Her dark hair always smelled like vanilla, and her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled. Robert had been 25, brimming with ideas but drowning in rejection letters. "You just haven't found the right person to listen yet," Isabel would say, massaging his shoulders as he hunched over his laptop. "Your ideas are brilliant. Someone will see that." Their first meeting had been pure chance, Robert sitting in a coffee shop, nursing a single cup for hours because he couldn't afford another, typing furiously on a second-hand laptop. Isabel had been the waitress who slipped him free refills and a muffin that would just get thrown out anyway. 2 weeks later, when his roommate kicked him out for missing rent again, it was Isabel who offered her couch. The couch became their shared bed within a month. "We don't have much," she'd said, "but we have each other." And they did have each other completely. On nights when they couldn't afford to go out, they'd walk in the rain instead, splashing through puddles like children. Once, caught in a sudden downpour, they'd sheltered under a store awning, both soaking wet. "We're a mess," Robert had laughed, water dripping from his nose. Isabel had taken his face in her hands. "We'll find sunshine, even in storms," she'd whispered before kissing him. It became their phrase, whispered during hard times, shouted during good ones. "We'll find sunshine, even in storms." There were so many storms that year. The month when their electricity was shut off, the week when Isabel got sick but couldn't afford to miss work, the day their landlord pounded on the door, demanding late rent. 2 more days, Isabel had promised the red-faced man. After he left, she'd opened her wallet and counted out bills, tip money she'd been saving. "That was for your writing course," Robert had protested. "I'll save up again," she'd shrugged. "You're what matters." Later, Robert discovered she'd been skipping lunches to save money. When he confronted her, she just smiled. "You need your strength for all those interviews. I'm fine with a snack." Then came the call that changed everything. A tech startup in San Francisco had seen Robert's application. They wanted him to pitch his ideas, in person, 2 days later. "This is it," Isabel had squealed, jumping into his arms. "I told you someone would see how amazing you are." But then the recruiter called again. "We're looking for hungry, unattached innovators," the man had said. "No distractions, no baggage. This is a 24/7 commitment. You understand?" Robert understood perfectly. The next morning, while Isabel was at work, he packed his things. He left a note. "Got the opportunity of a lifetime. Have to move fast. I'll call you." He never did. The boardroom fell silent as Robert concluded his presentation. The investors' faces were unreadable masks, betraying neither enthusiasm nor disappointment. Robert maintained his confident smile, though inside he felt the familiar hollowness that always followed these high-stakes meetings. "We'll be in touch by the end of the week, Mr. Langford," said the lead investor, a silver-haired woman who hadn't smiled once during the hour-long pitch. "I look forward to it," Robert replied smoothly, gathering his materials. Outside the gleaming office tower, the sky had darkened with threatening rain clouds. Robert checked his watch, 3:42 p.m. His evening was empty as usual, just the way he preferred it. No complications, no surprises. "Where to, sir?" Mark asked as Robert slid into the back seat of the town car. "Home," Robert answered, already scrolling through emails on his phone. "Take Riverside Drive. The expressway will be backed up by now." The car glided through downtown traffic, stopping at a red light near Franklin Park. Robert barely registered the scenery outside his window. The worn benches, scattered leaves, and people hurrying to beat the coming rain. His mind was already calculating the probability of securing the investment, planning contingencies. A small tap on his window jolted him from his thoughts. A boy stood there, maybe 6 or 7 years old, with wide brown eyes and a mop of dark curls. His feet were bare despite the chilly autumn air, his jeans frayed at the cuffs. Something about the child's face made Robert's chest tighten strangely. The boy tapped again, more insistently. "Sir?" Mark's concerned voice came from the front seat. "Should I?" Robert lowered the window just a crack. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice more curt than he intended. The boy's face lit up with a smile that seemed impossibly familiar. "Mommy says I should call you Daddy." The words hit Robert like a physical blow. His phone slipped from his fingers, clattering to the car floor. "What did you say?" he whispered. The boy pointed toward a bench where a thin woman sat hunched in a hooded sweatshirt, her face turned away. "That's my mommy. She told me about you." Robert's eyes narrowed as he studied the woman's profile. Even from this distance, even after 13 years, he recognized the curve of her cheek, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear. Isabel. The boy leaned closer to the window, his small hands pressing against the glass. "Mommy says you used to say something special, about sunshine and storms." Robert felt the blood drain from his face. The world around him seemed to blur, leaving only this child's earnest eyes in focus. "We'll find sunshine even in storms," the boy recited carefully, as if he'd practiced the words many times. The light turned green. Horns blared behind them. "Sir?" Mark's voice sounded distant. "Should I move on?" Robert couldn't speak. His eyes locked with Isabel's as she finally turned to face him. Her once vibrant face was thinner now, shadowed with exhaustion. But her eyes, those eyes that had once looked at him with such love, now held nothing but wary resignation. "Drive," Robert finally managed, his voice barely audible. "Just drive." As the car pulled away, Robert twisted in his seat to look back. The boy stood waving, a small figure growing smaller in the distance. Beside him, Isabel remained motionless on the bench, watching the car disappear. "This isn't happening," Robert muttered to himself, his hands trembling. "It can't be." But the truth pounded in his chest with each heartbeat. The boy's face, his own eyes staring back at him. The phrase only he and Isabel had shared. The timing, 13 years. He had a son. Robert paced his office like a caged animal. 3 days had passed since the encounter at the traffic light, but the boy's words echoed in his mind like a broken record. "Mommy says I should call you Daddy." He loosened his tie and stared out at the cityscape below. Rain streaked down the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the lights of the city into blurry smudges. For a moment, he thought he saw a small face reflected in the glass, wide eyes, unruly curls, and he spun around with a gasp. The office was empty. "Get it together," he muttered, pressing his palms against his temples. He hadn't slept more than a few hours since that day. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Isabel's face, not the vibrant, hopeful girl he'd known, but the hollow-cheeked woman on that park bench. Robert sank into his leather chair and pulled out his phone. Against his better judgment, he scrolled to a folder he hadn't opened in years, buried deep in his photo archive. Before, he'd labeled it. Before success. Before wealth. Before he became Robert Langford, tech mogul. The first image made his chest tighten. Isabel laughing in the rain, her dark hair plastered to her face, eyes crinkled with joy. They'd been caught in a downpour walking back from a dollar movie theater. He remembered how she'd spun in circles, arms outstretched, while he'd complained about his soaked shoes. "We'll find sunshine, even in storms," she'd said that day, pulling him into a dance on the empty sidewalk. A knock at the door made him quickly lock his screen. "Come in," he called, his voice rougher than intended. Clara entered with a stack of reports. "The quarterly projections, sir, and I've rescheduled tomorrow's board meeting for next Tuesday." "Fine." Robert noticed dark circles under her eyes. "Everything okay, Clara?" She looked startled by the personal question. "Oh yes, just a long night. My son had a fever." "I didn't know you had a son," Robert said, the words feeling strange on his tongue. Clara's face softened. "Yes, Aiden, he's 7. She pulled out her phone and showed Robert a photo of a gap-toothed boy holding a science fair trophy. "Single parenting isn't easy, but he's worth every sleepless night." Something twisted in Robert's stomach. "I'm sure he is." After Clara left, Robert sat motionless for several minutes. Then, with shaking hands, he opened his laptop and typed Isabel Moreno into a search engine. Nothing useful appeared. On impulse, he accessed a database his company had helped develop for the city's social services, a system that tracked individuals in the shelter system. It was meant for research purposes, but his security clearance gave him access. His heart nearly stopped when her name appeared on the screen. Moreno, Isabel. Current residence, Hope Harbor Women and Children's Shelter. The listing included a case number and entry date, just 2 months ago. God, he whispered, staring at the screen. The sleek, sterile office suddenly felt like it was closing in on him. The boy, his son, was living in a shelter with Isabel. The woman who had once believed in him when no one else would. The woman he had abandoned without a backward glance. The next morning, Robert arrived at Hope Harbor Women and Children's Shelter dressed in the plainest clothes he owned, jeans and a gray sweater that still somehow looked expensive. The building was a weathered brick structure with peeling blue paint on the doorframe. A small, hand-painted sign welcomed visitors. His heart hammered as he pushed open the door. The lobby was simple but clean, with mismatched furniture and walls covered in children's artwork. A middle-aged woman with graying hair looked up from the front desk. "Can I help you?" she asked, her eyes narrowing slightly at his obviously expensive watch. Robert cleared his throat. "I'm looking for someone who might have stayed here. Isabel Moreno?" The woman's expression remained neutral. "I'm sorry, but we don't give out information about our residents." "Please," Robert said, the word feeling foreign on his tongue. "I'm an old friend. I just found out she was in a difficult situation." The woman studied him for a long moment. "Moreno, we did have an Isabel here, but she checked out about 3 weeks ago. Didn't say where she was going." Robert's shoulders sagged. "Did she have a child with her? A little boy?" Something softened in the woman's face. "Look, I shouldn't tell you anything, but..." She glanced around and lowered her voice. "She wasn't Moreno here. She used a different last name. Kept to herself mostly, but she was good people. Always helped in the kitchen, read stories to the other kids." "And her son?" Robert pressed. "Sweet little boy, Mateo. Always drawing these incredible pictures. Superheroes mostly. Said they protected his mom." The woman smiled at the memory. That kid could make anyone smile, even on their worst day. Robert felt something crack inside his chest. "Thank you," he managed to say, leaving his business card on the counter. "If she comes back, or if you hear anything." "I'll let her decide if she wants to contact you," the woman replied firmly. Over the next week, Robert found himself constantly looking out his office window toward the park where he'd first seen them. On Wednesday afternoon, as rain drizzled against the glass, he noticed a small figure in a bright yellow raincoat darting between trees. His breath caught. The boy, Mateo, was placing something on the steps of the building. Robert watched, frozen, as the child carefully positioned what looked like paper airplanes before running back to the shelter of the trees. When Mateo disappeared, Robert rushed downstairs. Outside on the marble steps of his corporate headquarters lay 3 colorful paper airplanes. With trembling hands, he unfolded the first one. It was a crayon drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands, a tall man in a blue suit, a woman with long dark hair, and a small boy between them. Across the top, in careful child's handwriting, "Thank you for the sunshine, Daddy." The second airplane contained a drawing of a superhero with a cape that looked suspiciously like Robert's face. The third had a simple message that made Robert's knees weak. "Mommy says you were just lost in the storm." Robert clutched the drawings to his chest, scanning the park for any sign of Mateo or Isabel. But they were gone. Guilt and confusion washed over him like the rain that now soaked through his expensive shirt. The next afternoon, Robert canceled all his meetings. He wore casual clothes and parked his car 3 blocks from the park, heart pounding with nervous energy. He'd come with no plan, only a desperate need to see them again. For nearly 2 hours, he waited on a bench, pretending to read a newspaper. Just as he was about to give up, he spotted a familiar yellow raincoat. Mateo skipped through the park, stopping to pet a scruffy brown dog that wandered near the trash cans. Robert watched, throat tight, as the boy pulled a half sandwich from his pocket and offered it to the stray. The dog wagged its tail gratefully, gobbling the food while Mateo patted its head. "That's all I got today, buddy," Mateo said, his voice carrying across the quiet park. "Maybe tomorrow I can bring more." When the boy started walking away, Robert followed at a distance. Mateo moved with purpose, occasionally stopping to pick up a shiny rock or an interesting leaf. He waved at a pretzel vendor who smiled and slipped him a small bag without taking money. "Tell your mama I said hello," the vendor called after him. "I will, Mr. Tony," Mateo replied, clutching his treasure. The boy led Robert away from the nicer parts of downtown, past vacant lots and buildings with boarded windows. Finally, Mateo approached an abandoned warehouse with faded red brick. A small side door, barely visible behind overgrown bushes, opened to his touch. Robert's stomach twisted. This was where they lived? He waited several minutes before approaching the building, peering through a dirty window. Inside, he could make out a makeshift living space. Blankets and pillows were arranged neatly in one corner. A plastic bin held folded clothes. Mateo's drawings covered one wall, bringing the only color to the grim space. The boy sat cross-legged on a blanket, carefully arranging his day's findings: the pretzel, some wildflowers, and the interesting rocks. Robert's eyes burned with tears. This child, his child, living like this while he had 3 empty bedrooms in his penthouse. Movement caught his attention. Isabel appeared at the far end of the warehouse, carrying 2 plastic bags. She limped slightly, her face drawn with exhaustion. But when Mateo ran to her, her entire expression transformed. Her smile lit up her tired face as she hugged him. "Look what Mr. Tony gave me," Mateo exclaimed, showing her the pretzel. "That was so nice of him," Isabel said, her voice warm despite her obvious fatigue. "Did you thank him properly?" "Yes, Mommy, and I found these for you." He presented the wildflowers with a flourish. "They're beautiful, mi amor." She tucked one behind her ear. "Let's have our dinner picnic, okay? I got us something special today." Robert watched as she unpacked a small container of fruit and 2 sandwiches, wincing as she sat down. Even in these conditions, she created joy for her son. Even with nothing, she gave everything. The memory hit Robert like a physical blow. Isabel years ago, wrapping half her dinner to save for him, claiming she wasn't hungry. Isabel staying up all night to help him prepare for interviews. Isabel believing in him when no one else would. He stumbled back to his car, vision blurred with tears. The contrast between her goodness and his selfishness crushed him. He gripped the steering wheel, staring at the warehouse as dusk fell, and a single light flickered on inside. "What have I done?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "My God, what have I done?" Robert sat in his office, staring at his phone. His hands trembled slightly as he opened a folder he'd hidden away years ago, labeled simply, "Past." Inside were hundreds of unread messages from Isabel. He tapped on the first one, dated just 2 weeks after he'd left. "Robert, please call me. It's important. I need to talk to you." Another, a month later. "I don't understand why you won't answer. I thought what we had meant something." He scrolled through dozens more, each growing more desperate. Then, about 7 months after he'd disappeared from her life, a message that made his blood run cold. "I don't know if you'll ever read this, but you're going to be a father. I'm having your baby. His name will be Mateo." Robert's hand covered his mouth. She had tried to tell him. For months after that, she'd sent updates about the pregnancy, then pictures of newborn Mateo, his tiny face scrunched up in sleep. All these messages, and he'd been too focused on building his empire to even open them. "Mr. Langford?" Clara knocked softly before entering his office. "I have those quarterly projections, and are you all right?" Robert quickly locked his phone, but not before Clara noticed the wetness in his eyes. "Fine," he said, clearing his throat. "What else did you bring?" Clara placed a colorful catalog on his desk. "The children's book donation drive for our charity campaign. The board thought it might be good publicity if you personally selected some titles." Robert stared at the catalog. Bright, cheerful books about families, adventures, and dreams. Books that Mateo should have been reading in a warm, safe home. "I'll look it over," he said, his voice strangely quiet. After Clara left, an idea formed in Robert's mind. He couldn't undo the past, but perhaps he could help without intruding. He opened his laptop and found the shelter's donation page. With a few clicks, he transferred $10,000 marked as anonymous with a note, "For Isabel Moreno and her son." It wasn't enough, not nearly enough, but it was something. That evening, Robert drove past the park again, this time spotting Mateo alone on the sidewalk. The boy knelt on the concrete, focused intently on creating colorful chalk drawings. Robert parked and watched from a distance. Mateo had drawn several pictures, a dog, some flowers, and what looked like a rainbow. But the drawing that made Robert's chest tighten was unmistakable. 3 stick figures standing together under a bright yellow sun. The tallest wore what appeared to be a tie. The middle figure had long hair, and between them, holding both their hands, was a small figure in yellow. A family. His family. Robert watched as Mateo carefully added details to the drawing, his small face serious with concentration. The boy hummed softly to himself, occasionally looking up as if searching for someone. "Is that your daddy?" a passing child asked, pointing to the tall figure. Mateo nodded proudly. "He's very busy making sunshine," he explained, "but someday he's gonna come home." The simple faith in the boy's voice struck Robert like a physical blow. This child, his son, still believed in him, without having any reason to. Robert's heart hammered in his chest as he watched Isabel sorting through a small pile of clothes outside the laundromat. Her thin fingers worked quickly, counting quarters from a worn plastic pouch. She looked so different from the vibrant young woman he'd known, thinner with dark circles under her eyes and a permanent crease between her brows. Yet somehow she was still beautiful. For 3 days he'd followed them at a distance, gathering courage. Now, as Mateo played with a toy truck on a nearby bench, Robert knew it was time. He stepped out of his car and approached slowly. Isabel didn't notice him until his shadow fell across her laundry basket. When she looked up, her face drained of color. "Isabel," he said softly. She stood quickly, nearly knocking over the basket. Her eyes darted to Mateo, then back to Robert. "What do you want?" Her voice was sharp with fear. "Just to talk." Robert kept his distance, hands visible at his sides. "Please." Isabel glanced at the laundromat owner, watching curiously through the window. "I have nothing to say to you." "I understand why you hate me." "You don't understand anything," she interrupted, gathering her things. "Mateo, come here, sweetie." The boy looked up, his face lighting with recognition. "It's the man from the car." He scrambled toward them, but Isabel pulled him behind her protectively. "Are you here to take him?" she whispered fiercely. "Because I won't let you." Robert stepped back, shocked. "Take him?" "No, Isabel. I just found out he exists. I never knew." "Because you never bothered to find out." Her voice cracked. "You left without a backward glance. You changed your number. You disappeared." "I was wrong," Robert admitted. "So wrong, but please let me explain." "Explain what?" Tears filled her eyes. "That your career was more important? That we were holding you back?" She laughed bitterly. "I already know all that." Mateo tugged at her sleeve. "Mommy, why are you crying?" "It's nothing, baby." She wiped her eyes quickly. Robert knelt to Mateo's level. "Hi there, I'm an old friend of your mom's." "You're the Sunshine Man," Mateo said confidently. Isabel pulled Mateo closer. "Stop. Just stop." She looked directly at Robert, her eyes flashing with pain. "You want to know the truth? I found out I was pregnant the very day you left. I tried calling you for weeks." Robert felt like he'd been punched. "Why didn't you keep trying? Why didn't you find me?" "I did find you." Her voice dropped to a whisper. 6 months after Mateo was born, I saw the announcement of your engagement to that investor's daughter. Your perfect power couple, the article called it. She shook her head. "I decided then that Mateo and I would be better off alone than disrupting the life you'd chosen." Robert stood frozen, speechless. The engagement had fallen apart within months, a business arrangement he'd never gone through with. But Isabel couldn't have known that. "Let me help you now," he finally said. "My guest house is sitting empty. You and Mateo could stay there, just until you get back on your feet." "We don't need your charity," Isabel said, though her voice wavered. "It's not charity," Robert insisted. "It's the very least I can do." The early morning sun painted the city park in gentle gold. Robert sat alone on a bench, his expensive suit jacket folded beside him, tie loosened. He'd barely slept, his mind replaying Isabel's words over and over. He'd come here hoping the quiet would help him think. A small figure appeared at the edge of the path. Mateo, with his tattered sneakers and bright eyes, approached cautiously, clutching something to his chest. "Hi," the boy said simply. Robert straightened, surprised. "Hi there. Where's your mom?" "Still sleeping." Mateo pointed vaguely toward the warehouse. "I come here to watch the sun wake up. Mommy says it's not safe, but I'm careful." Robert frowned, thinking of a 7-year-old navigating these streets alone at dawn. "Does she know you're here?" Mateo shook his head. "She works late. I don't want to wake her up." The boy climbed onto the bench beside Robert, his legs swinging above the ground. For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, watching a squirrel dart across the path. "I made something for you," Mateo finally said, holding out a folded piece of paper. Robert took it carefully, as if receiving a precious gift. When he unfolded it, his breath caught. The crayon drawing showed 3 stick figures, a tall man in a blue suit, a woman with long dark hair, and a small boy between them, all holding hands. Above them, a bright yellow sun beamed down. Across the top, in wobbly letters, "My Dream Dad." "That's you," Mateo pointed to the tall figure. "And that's Mommy. And me." Robert's vision blurred. He blinked rapidly, afraid to let the boy see how deeply the simple drawing affected him. "Do you like it?" Mateo asked, uncertainty creeping into his voice. "I love it," Robert managed to say. "It's the best gift I've ever gotten." Mateo beamed. "I knew you would. You look sad sometimes, like Mommy, but the sun makes everything better." Robert studied the boy's face, Isabel's warm brown eyes, but his own chin, his own smile. How had he not seen it immediately? "Mateo," he said gently, "I knew your mom a long time ago." "I know," Mateo nodded matter-of-factly. "You're the one who knows about sunshine and storms." "That's right." Robert swallowed hard. "Your mom and I were very close friends." "But then you went away," Mateo said, his voice suddenly serious. "Mommy cries sometimes when she thinks I'm sleeping." The words struck Robert like physical blows. "I made a big mistake," he admitted. "The biggest mistake of my life." Mateo considered this, then patted Robert's hand. "That's okay. Mommy says everybody makes mistakes. That's how we learn to be better." Later that afternoon, Isabel found the drawing tucked in Mateo's coat pocket while hanging their few clothes to dry. She sat heavily on their makeshift bed, studying the crayon family portrait with trembling hands. "Mateo," she called softly. "When did you draw this?" "For the Sunshine Man," he answered proudly. "He said he knew you a long time ago." Isabel pressed her lips together, fighting conflicting emotions. For 7 years, she'd protected Mateo from disappointment, from the pain of an absent father. Yet here was her son, instinctively reaching out to the very man who had broken her heart. But the man in the park wasn't the same ambitious, self-centered boy who'd left her. She'd seen genuine remorse in his eyes, real pain when he learned about Mateo. That evening, when Robert returned with a careful offer of groceries, Isabel met his eyes steadily. "1 week," she said firmly. "We'll stay in your guest house for 1 week, just until I find something stable." The apartment manager handed them the key with a curious glance at Robert's expensive watch and Isabel's worn coat. But Mateo bounced excitedly between them, unaware of the tension, already planning where to hang his drawings. The guest house felt like a dream. Clean walls, working appliances, and windows that let in streams of sunlight. For Mateo, it was a palace. For Isabel, it was a painful reminder of all she couldn't provide. On their second morning there, Isabel sat on a stone bench in the small garden, watching Mateo explore every corner with wide-eyed wonder. He'd already claimed a sunny spot for his drawings, carefully arranging his few broken crayons on a patio table. The sound of footsteps made her turn. A well-dressed woman with kind eyes approached, carrying a leather portfolio. "You must be Isabel," she said warmly. I'm Clara Williams, Robert's assistant. Isabel straightened, suddenly conscious of her worn clothes. Yes. Nice to meet you. Clara smiled at Mateo, who was studying her with curious eyes. And this must be the artist I've heard about. Mateo grinned shyly. I'm not really an artist, I just like to draw. That sounds like an artist to me, Clara said, kneeling to his level. She opened her portfolio, revealing colorful brochures. There's a children's art class at the community center near here. They meet twice a week and they have all the supplies you could dream of. Mateo's eyes widened. Real paints and big paper? Everything, Clara confirmed. She glanced at Isabel. It's completely free. I checked. Isabel felt a mix of gratitude and discomfort. That's very thoughtful, but… Please, Mommy? Mateo interrupted, bouncing on his toes. Please? How could she deny him this small joy? We'll see, she said softly. Over the next few days, Robert began appearing more frequently. First with a small bicycle he claimed was just sitting in storage, then with children's books, then simply to spend time. Isabel watched from the kitchen window as Robert taught Mateo how to fix a loose chain on the bike, their heads bent together in concentration. Why is the chain so important? She heard Mateo ask. Because it connects everything, Robert explained patiently. Without it, the wheels turn, but you don't go anywhere. Later, they sat on the porch steps reading together, Mateo stumbling over words while Robert gently helped. Soon, Mateo's giggles filled the air as Robert told him silly jokes that Isabel hadn't heard since their own youth. One evening, as Mateo napped inside, Clara and Robert sat at the garden table reviewing documents. He's a remarkable boy, Clara observed, watching Isabel through the window. Robert nodded, his eyes distant. I missed everything. First steps, first words. You're here now, Clara said gently. Robert shook his head, his voice dropping to a whisper. I didn't just leave her. I left who I was supposed to be. From her spot near the flower beds, Isabel froze, those words hitting her like a physical blow. She hadn't forgiven him, couldn't forgive him yet for those years of struggle and loneliness. But watching Mateo bloom in Robert's presence stirred something painful and hopeful in her heart. After a few days, the community center bustled with children's excited voices when Robert arrived for Mateo's first art class. His palms were sweaty as he checked his watch, 5 minutes early. He smoothed his tie, feeling oddly out of place among the casual parents in jeans and t-shirts. When Mateo spotted him from across the room, the boy's face lit up like a sunrise. He tugged on Isabel's sleeve and pointed, bouncing on his toes. You came, Mateo shouted, running toward Robert. Robert knelt down, catching Mateo in an awkward but heartfelt hug. Of course I did. I wouldn't miss it. The art teacher, a woman with paint-splattered overalls and a warm smile, gathered the children in a circle. Today, we're sharing our family portraits. Who wants to go first? Mateo's hand shot up instantly. Me, please, the teacher nodded. Mateo, would you like to introduce who came with you today? Mateo stood proudly, pointing first to Isabel, who smiled gently from her seat against the wall. That's my mommy. Then he turned to Robert, his little face suddenly serious. And this is my daddy. I think… A lump formed in Robert's throat. Those two uncertain words, I think, held more hope than he deserved. Well, we're happy to have both your parents here, the teacher said kindly. Would you like to show everyone your drawing? Mateo nodded eagerly and held up his artwork. 3 stick figures stood hand in hand beneath a brilliant yellow sun. The tallest wore what looked like a tie, the middle one had long black hair, and the smallest, clearly Mateo, stood between them with an enormous smile. Across the top in wobbly letters were the words, We're together now. Robert felt his chest tighten. He glanced at Isabel, whose eyes shimmered with unshed tears. After class ended, they walked together to the parking lot, Mateo skipping ahead with his artwork fluttering in the breeze. Thank you for coming, Isabel said softly. It meant everything to him. Robert nodded, not trusting his voice. Can I Give you both a ride home?" The drive back to the guest house was quiet, filled with the weight of unspoken feelings. No grand gestures, no dramatic promises, just the gentle hum of the car engine and Mateo humming softly in the back seat. That night, alone in his penthouse, Robert pulled out an old external hard drive he'd buried in his closet years ago. The screen flickered to life with videos from another lifetime. Isabel laughing in the rain, her hand outstretched toward the camera. Isabel reading poetry on their threadbare couch. Isabel dancing in their tiny kitchen. "We'll find sunshine even in storms," her voice echoed from the speakers. Robert touched the screen, his fingers trembling. The magnitude of what he'd thrown away crashed over him like a wave. As spring settled over the city, the guest house garden burst with colorful blooms. Each evening after work, Robert would loosen his tie and kneel beside Mateo in the soil, teaching him how to plant seedlings and pull weeds. Their laughter drifted through the open windows, where Isabel often sat with a notebook watching them. "Dad, look," Mateo called one afternoon, holding up a wriggling worm. The word "dad" slipped from his lips naturally now, no longer followed by, "I think." Robert's heart swelled every time he heard it. "That's a good one, buddy. He's helping our plants grow strong." Mateo carefully returned the worm to the earth. "Just like you're helping me grow strong?" Robert paused, touched by the simple wisdom in the child's words. "I hope so, Mateo. I really hope so." Later that evening, Robert found Isabel at the kitchen table, scribbling furiously in her notebook. She quickly closed it when he entered. "Sorry," he said, backing away. "I didn't mean to interrupt." "It's okay," she replied, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Just some silly stories." "You used to talk about becoming a writer," Robert said softly. "I remember how your eyes would light up when you described the children's books you wanted to create." Isabel looked surprised. "You remember that?" "I remember everything about you, Isabel." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. The next day, Clara visited with a basket of fresh muffins. While Robert was at work, she sat with Isabel at the garden table, Mateo playing nearby. "These stories are wonderful," Clara said, flipping through Isabel's notebook. "The way you capture a child's perspective is magical." Isabel blushed. "They're just something I do for fun." "My friend runs a small publishing house that specializes in children's literature," Clara said, her eyes twinkling. "Would you mind if I showed her?" Across town, in a sleek high-rise office, Vanessa Hale scrolled through her tablet during a board meeting. A headline caught her eye. "Tech mogul Robert Langford spotted playing father at local art center." The article showed a blurry photo of Robert kneeling beside a small boy. Behind them stood a woman with long, dark hair, a face Vanessa recognized instantly from old photos Robert had once tried to hide. Her perfectly manicured nails tightened around the tablet. 8 years ago, when Robert was climbing the corporate ladder, he'd told Vanessa there was no one from his past. Their engagement had been strategic, her family connections, his technical brilliance. But she'd always sensed he was holding something back. Now she knew what, or rather who. Excusing herself from the meeting, Vanessa stepped into her private office and dialed her lawyer. "I need you to look into something for me," she said, her voice cold and controlled. "It seems Robert has been keeping secrets." She stared at the photo, at the woman who had clearly meant something to Robert long before Vanessa entered his life. "Let's remind Robert what happens when he lets his heart ruin business," she said, ending the call with a decisive tap. Vanessa Hale sat in her penthouse office, the city lights twinkling below like stars she could control with the flick of a switch. Her sleek laptop cast a blue glow across her face as she scrolled through old photos. Robert in a tailored tuxedo, his arm around her waist at charity galas and business events. They had made such a perfect power couple. "Perfect until he decided to play house with his little secret family," she muttered, selecting several images and attaching them to an email. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she rarely used but always kept handy. "Marcus, it's Vanessa Hale." Her voice dripped with honey, masking the venom beneath. "I have something juicy for you. Exclusive content, of course." Marcus Parker, the city's most notorious gossip columnist, perked up instantly. "I'm listening, Ms. Hale." "Robert Langford, tech genius, supposed humanitarian, has been hiding quite the personal drama. She paused for effect. He's currently playing house with a homeless woman and her child. I have photos of them at an art center, and reliable sources tell me they're living in his guest house. Interesting, Marcus said, his fingers already typing notes. But why would that damage him? Sounds like charity work to me. Vanessa's laugh was cold. Oh, Marcus, dig deeper. This woman isn't just any charity case. She's from his past, before the money, before me. And now suddenly she appears with a child? Shareholders don't appreciate CEOs with messy personal lives and surprise families. She sent the email with a decisive click. I've included photos of Robert with me during our engagement period, which, coincidentally, would have been around the time this child was conceived. Connect the dots however you wish. This runs tomorrow morning, Marcus said eagerly. Front page of the digital edition. Perfect, Vanessa replied, hanging up with a satisfied smile. Across town, in the warm glow of a bedside lamp, Robert sat in a wooden rocking chair, a children's book open on his lap. Mateo was curled against his chest, eyes heavy with sleep. Just one more page, Dad, Mateo mumbled, fighting to keep his eyes open. Robert's heart swelled at the word Dad. It still felt new, like a gift he wasn't sure he deserved. The brave little knight returned home, he read softly, where he found that the greatest treasure wasn't gold or jewels, but the love of his family waiting for him. He looked down to find Mateo fast asleep, his small hand clutching Robert's shirt. Carefully, Robert closed the book but made no move to get up. Instead, he gently rocked, savoring the weight of his son against him. In the doorway, Isabel watched silently. The sight of them together, Robert's protective arm around Mateo, their matching peaceful expressions, made her throat tight with emotion. For years, she'd carried anger like armor, protecting herself from the pain Robert had caused. But watching him now, she felt that armor cracking. He really loves him, she whispered to herself, almost afraid to believe it. Robert's eyes were closed now too, his breathing deep and even. He looked different in sleep, younger, unburdened by the weight of success and past mistakes. This wasn't the ambitious young man who had abandoned her, nor the cold businessman she'd glimpsed in magazine photos over the years. This was someone new, someone who might be worth trusting again. The thought terrified her. She'd been hurt before, left alone when she needed someone most. Could she really risk her heart, and worse, Mateo's heart, on the hope that Robert had truly changed? As she turned to leave, she didn't notice her phone lighting up with a news alert about tomorrow's headline. The soft evening light was fading when Robert's phone buzzed angrily on the kitchen counter. He glanced at the screen, seeing Clara's name flash repeatedly. With a frown, he answered. Robert, we have a situation. Clara's voice was tight with urgency. The PR team is in full crisis mode. There's an article. It's everywhere already. What article? Robert asked, his stomach nodding as he moved toward his laptop. Tech CEO's secret love child, reputation in question, Clara quoted. It has photos of you with Mateo at the art center, old pictures of you and Vanessa during your engagement, and quotes from anonymous sources suggesting you abandoned your pregnant girlfriend years ago. Robert's hands went cold as he opened the web page. There it was, his face, Mateo's face, splashed across the digital front page. The article painted him as a callous businessman who'd hidden his past and was now playing father when convenient. The shareholders are panicking, Clara continued. Marcus Whitman from the board called twice already. They're worried about the company image, stock prices. I don't care about stock prices right now, Robert snapped, then immediately softened his tone. I'm sorry, Clara, but I need to talk to Isabel first. As if summoned by her name, Isabel appeared in the doorway, her face ashen. She held her phone in a trembling hand. I saw it, she whispered. Someone showed me the headline while I was picking up Mateo's prescription. Robert ended his call with Clara and moved toward Isabel. I swear I didn't do this. I would never expose you or Mateo like this. Isabel's eyes flashed with fear and anger. It doesn't matter who did it, it's done. Her voice cracked. People were staring at me in the pharmacy. A woman asked if I was that homeless woman from the article. Robert reached for her hand, but she pulled away. You said you'd protect us, she said, tears gathering in her eyes. Now the world's pointing fingers. Isabel, please, I'll fix this. How? She demanded. You can't undo this. Our faces are out there now. Mateo's face is out there. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Do you know what that means for a child who's lived on the streets? For people to know where he is now? The implications hit Robert like a physical blow. He hadn't considered the dangers of Mateo's sudden visibility, to predators, to social services, to anyone who might recognize them from their days of vulnerability. Later that night, after Mateo had fallen asleep, Isabel quietly pulled a worn duffel bag from under the bed. With practiced efficiency, she folded their few belongings, pausing only when she came to a drawing Mateo had made of the three of them. Mommy? Mateo's sleepy voice startled her. Are we leaving? Isabel turned, trying to hide the bag. We might need to, sweetie. Just for a little while. But what about Dad? Mateo asked, rubbing his eyes. Won't he be sad? Isabel sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing Mateo's hair. Sometimes we have to do hard things to stay safe. Robert paced in his home office, the morning light barely filtering through the blinds. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing with notifications, shareholders panicking, reporters asking for comments, even old colleagues expressing their concern. What are you going to do? Clara asked, standing in the doorway with her tablet clutched to her chest. Robert looked up, his eyes red-rimmed from a sleepless night. I'm calling an emergency board meeting today. 3 hours later, Robert sat at the head of the conference table, facing the grim expressions of his company's board members. The legal advisor, a stern woman named Patricia, laid out the options with clinical detachment. The simplest solution would be to take legal custody of the child, she explained. It demonstrates responsibility while allowing us to control the narrative. The public loves a redemption story. Wealthy CEO steps up to care for his son. And what about Isabel? Robert asked, his voice tight. Patricia adjusted her glasses. We could offer her a generous settlement with a non-disclosure agreement. It's cleaner this way. Cleaner? Robert repeated, disgust rising in his throat. We're talking about a family, not a PR problem to sanitize. The CFO leaned forward. Robert, be reasonable. This company's reputation, your reputation, is on the line. We need to minimize damage. Robert stood up suddenly, his chair rolling backward. No, I won't separate them. I won't treat them like a liability. The room fell silent. Clara, who had been quietly taking notes, caught his eye and gave him a small, approving nod. If you cave now, she said softly, you're no better than who you used to be. Her words hit him like a physical blow. The truth of it, simple and devastating, cleared his mind. This meeting is over, Robert announced. I'm not choosing between my company and my family. Back at home, Robert found Isabel sitting on the guest house porch, watching Mateo draw on the sidewalk with chalk. Her bags were packed by the door. I have an idea, Robert said, sitting beside her. I want to email the journalist who wrote the article. Tell them the whole story, the truth on record. Isabel looked at him sharply. More publicity? That's your solution? Not without your consent, Robert assured her. But hiding won't protect Mateo. Owning our story might. Isabel watched her son, who was drawing what looked like 3 stick figures holding hands under a sun. And what is our story, Robert? That I made the biggest mistake of my life walking away from you, that I'm trying to make it right, that Mateo deserves a father who's brave enough to stand by him, publicly. Tears filled Isabel's eyes. She wiped them away quickly. If this helps Mateo have a father, she said finally, I'll face the world. That night, after Robert sent the email to the journalist, Isabel sat alone in the guesthouse bedroom. The soft glow of the bedside lamp illuminated the small box she kept with her always, a weathered shoebox containing all that remained of her journey as a mother. As she lifted the lid, memories washed over her like a tide. 7 years earlier, Isabel had stood in their tiny apartment, staring at the pregnancy test with trembling hands. The plus sign blurred through her tears. Tears of joy quickly followed by panic when she realized Robert's phone had been disconnected. "He'll call," she whispered to herself. "He promised." But days turned to weeks, and weeks to months. The landlord's patience ran out with the rent money. Isabel packed what she could carry and left the rest behind. The women's shelter smelled of bleach and sadness. At night, Isabel curled on her narrow cot, one hand protectively over her growing belly. "We'll be okay," she whispered. "We'll find sunshine, even in storms." By day, she cleaned office buildings. Her boss, Mr. Ramirez, let her work nights when her morning sickness subsided. Her swollen ankles ached as she emptied trash bins and scrubbed toilets, but she never complained. "You should contact the father," Mr. Ramirez suggested once, his kind eyes concerned. Isabel shook her head. She'd seen the business magazine with Robert's face on the cover, announcing his engagement to Vanessa Hale, heiress to a tech fortune. His dream come true. "Some dreams cost too much," she murmured, returning to her mop. In her shelter bed, Isabel wrote letters by flashlight. "Dear Robert, I'm having your baby. I hope you're happy with your new life. Dear Robert, I felt our baby kick today. He's strong like you always wanted to be. Dear Robert, I saw your face on a billboard today. Did you ever wonder what happened to me?" She never sent them. Instead, she folded each letter into a tiny paper heart and kept them in an old mint tin. The night Mateo was born, a fierce storm rattled the hospital windows. Lightning flashed as Isabel cried out in pain, squeezing the hand of a kind-faced nurse named Gloria. "You're not alone, honey," Gloria assured her. "You can do this." When they placed the tiny red-faced baby on her chest, Isabel wept. "Mateo," she whispered, "it means gift from God." Because despite everything, he was exactly that. A miracle she hadn't expected but couldn't imagine living without. As Mateo grew, Isabel saved everything. His first scribbled drawing, the handprint in faded blue paint, the wobbly stick figures that gradually took shape. She taught him to say please and thank you, to share his last cookie, to look for beauty even in hard places. One night as she tucked 3-year-old Mateo into a shelter bed, his tiny hand reached up to wipe away a tear she hadn't realized she'd shed. "Don't cry, Mommy," he whispered. Isabel kissed his forehead. "Someday your daddy will find us," she murmured, "if he still has a heart." The morning dawned bright and clear, but the sunshine streaming through the guest house windows couldn't warm the chill that ran through Isabel as she heard the firm knock at the door. She was in the kitchen making pancakes with Mateo, who was carefully arranging blueberries into smiley faces. "I'll get it," Robert called from the living room where he'd been reading the newspaper. When he opened the door, 2 strangers stood on the threshold, a woman in a crisp navy pantsuit and a uniformed officer beside her. "Mr. Langford?" the woman asked, her expression professionally neutral. "I'm Karen Winters with Child Protective Services. This is Officer Daniels. We need to speak with Isabel Moreno regarding her son, Mateo." Robert felt his stomach drop. What's this about? "We've received an anonymous complaint alleging Ms. Moreno is unstable and unfit to parent," Ms. Winters explained, her voice low but firm. "We're required to investigate all such claims." Isabel appeared in the doorway behind Robert, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Who is it?" she asked, but the color drained from her face when she saw their badges. "Ms. Moreno?" Officer Daniels stepped forward. "We need to discuss your living situation and your son's welfare." Mateo peeked around his mother's legs, pancake batter still on his cheek. "Mommy?" Robert stepped between them and the officers. "This is ridiculous. Isabel is an excellent mother. Whoever made this complaint is lying." Ms. Winters' expression softened slightly. "I understand your concern, Mr. Langford, but we have to follow protocol. The complaint included details about Ms. Moreno's history of homelessness and unstable living conditions, which she's no longer experiencing," Robert argued, his voice rising. "She's safe here. They both are." "Nevertheless," Officer Daniels continued, "protocol requires a temporary separation while we evaluate the situation." "Separation?" Isabel's voice cracked as she pulled Mateo closer to her side. Ms. Winters nodded. Just until we complete our investigation, Mateo would be placed in temporary foster care. No, Mateo cried, wrapping his arms around Isabel's legs. I don't want to go. Mommy, please. Isabel knelt down, her hands trembling as she cupped Mateo's face. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she forced a brave smile. It's okay. You be strong for Mommy, all right? But I want to stay with you, Mateo sobbed, his little body shaking. And Daddy, too. Robert watched in horror as Isabel held her son, whispering reassurances even as her own heart was breaking. In that moment, he knew exactly who was behind this. The timing was too perfect, the attack too precise. Vanessa. He stepped closer to the officers, his voice low and dangerous. This will not end like this. I promise. His eyes flashed with determination. Give us a moment to pack his things. As Isabel helped Mateo gather his favorite stuffed bear and a change of clothes, Robert made a quick phone call to his lawyer. When he hung up, his face was grim but resolute. I know who did this, he told Isabel quietly, and I'm going to fix it. As the CPS officers drove away with Mateo, Isabel collapsed onto the porch steps, her body racked with silent sobs. The pain was familiar, too familiar. It brought her back to those desperate days when she had no one. I can't lose him, she whispered, more to herself than to Robert, who stood beside her, his fists clenched in helpless rage. You won't, he promised, though his voice trembled with uncertainty. Later that evening, alone in the guest house bedroom, Isabel sat on the edge of the bed, holding Mateo's favorite drawing. Her mind drifted back to those darkest days. She remembered the stairwell of St. Mary's Hospital, where she'd slept for 3 nights after Mateo was born. The nurses had been kind, letting her stay an extra day after delivery, but eventually she'd had to leave. With nowhere to go, she'd found a corner in the emergency stairwell, cradling her newborn against her chest to keep him warm. I promised I'd always protect you, she whispered to the empty room, remembering how she'd sung lullabies to drown out the echo of footsteps and the distant wail of ambulance sirens. She recalled applying for a waitressing job using an ID borrowed from a woman at the shelter, Sarah Jenkins, because no one would hire a homeless single mother with no fixed address. The manager had been suspicious but desperate for help. She'd worked double shifts with Mateo, sleeping in a makeshift bed of clean tablecloths in the storage room. I did what I had to do, she murmured, wiping away tears, and I'd do it all again. Meanwhile, across town, Robert burst into his lawyer's office without an appointment. I need everything you've got, he demanded, tossing a folder onto the desk. I want to sue for false reporting, defamation, and I need evidence of Vanessa Hale's involvement in this CPS complaint. James Wilkins, Robert's attorney of 15 years, raised an eyebrow. This is serious, Robert. We're talking about challenging a CPS investigation. It's a setup, Robert insisted, his voice breaking. Vanessa is using her connections to punish me, and an innocent child is paying the price. The lawyer nodded slowly. I'll need statements from character witnesses, anyone who can vouch for Isabel's parenting. I'm already on it, Robert said, checking his phone. Clara's gathering statements from the shelter director and Mateo's art teacher. Across the city, Clara sat in a quiet cafe with Eliza Donovan, a respected journalist known for her integrity. The story that's circulating is a hit piece, Clara explained, sliding a folder across the table. This is the real story, Isabel's story, the one no one's bothered to hear. Eliza opened the folder, scanning the documents inside. Isabel's writing samples, photos of Mateo's artwork, statements from shelter workers who remembered her dedication to her son. Why come to me? Eliza asked. Clara's eyes were steady. Because you care about truth, not clicks. By late afternoon, Robert arrived at the CPS office with a thick manila envelope. Inside were notarized character statements from Clara, the shelter director, and Mateo's art teacher, all testifying to Isabel's extraordinary dedication as a mother despite impossible circumstances. "I'd like to speak to your supervisor," he told the receptionist, his voice calm but firm. "This case needs immediate review." His phone buzzed with a text from his lawyer. "Found connection between Vanessa and CPS complaint. Meeting in an hour." Robert took a deep breath. For the first time in years, he wasn't fighting for money or power. He was fighting for family. The small visiting room at the Child Protective Services office felt cold and sterile. Robert Langford sat awkwardly on a plastic chair that was far too small for his tall frame, clutching a colorful children's book in his hands. His usual confidence had abandoned him, replaced by a nervous energy he couldn't quite control. When the door opened and Mateo walked in with a social worker, the boy's face lit up with recognition. "Dad!" he called out, rushing forward. Robert caught him in a tight hug, fighting back the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. "Hey, buddy, I missed you." The social worker, a kind-faced woman named Ms. Patterson, nodded toward a corner of the room. "I'll be right over there if you need anything." Once they were settled side by side on the small couch, Robert pulled out the book he'd brought, a brightly illustrated hardcover with no author listed. "I brought something special to read today," he said, his voice soft. Mateo leaned against him. "Is it about superheroes?" "Even better," Robert replied. "It's about a brave boy who brings his family back together." He opened the book and began to read, his voice growing stronger with each word. Once upon a time, in the summer of 1965, there lived a boy named Marco, who had the biggest heart in the whole wide world. As Robert read, he told the story of a boy separated from his mother by a misunderstanding, and how the boy's courage and love eventually brought everyone back together. Throughout the tale, he squeezed in messages meant just for Mateo. Marco wasn't scared because he knew that families who belong together always find their way back. The hero didn't wear a cape, he just never gave up. Mateo listened with wide eyes, occasionally pointing at the pictures or asking questions. When Robert finished the story, the boy looked up with hope shining in his eyes. "Is that going to happen to us? Are we going to be together again?" Robert swallowed hard. "Yes," he promised. "Very soon." Across town, Isabel sat in another sterile room, facing a CPS evaluator who was reviewing her case file. "Ms. Moreno, can you tell me about your living situation before you stayed with Mr. Langford?" the woman asked, her pen poised over a notepad. Isabel straightened her shoulders. She could have cried, could have begged for sympathy, but instead, she chose dignity. "I did whatever was necessary to keep my son safe, fed, and loved," she said simply. "We didn't have much, but Mateo never went to bed without a story, never woke up without a hug, and never doubted for a second that he was the most important person in my world." The evaluator looked up, her expression softening slightly. "Many would argue that financial stability is crucial for a child's well-being." "Money buys comfort," Isabel acknowledged, "but love builds character. I've taught my son to be kind, to be brave, and to find joy even in hard times. Those lessons don't come from a bank account." Meanwhile, Clara Williams sat in her car outside a small coffee shop, reviewing the files her private investigator had just delivered. The evidence was damning. Bank transfers from Vanessa Hale to a mid-level CPS employee, followed by an unusually rapid escalation of the anonymous complaint against Isabel. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she dialed Robert's number. This was exactly what they needed to bring Mateo home, and to make Vanessa pay for what she'd done. "Robert," she said when he answered, "I've got it. I've got the proof." The Montclair Hotel's grand ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and the glitter of expensive jewelry. The annual Technology Leadership Awards Gala was in full swing, with Silicon Valley's elite mingling over champagne and carefully crafted hors d'oeuvres. At the center of it all stood Vanessa Hale, resplendent in a midnight blue gown, accepting congratulations for her Visionary Leadership Award. Robert Langford wasn't on the guest list. He'd given up his invitation when the board asked him to step back temporarily, but that didn't stop him from walking through the grand double doors, determination in every step. The crowd parted like water as he moved through the room. Whispers followed him. "Isn't that Langford? What's he doing here?" Did you hear about the scandal? Clara Williams stood near the back, phone in hand, watching the scene unfold. She'd just received confirmation that the article about Isabel's journey had gone live. Perfect timing. Vanessa's smile froze when she spotted Robert approaching the stage. She leaned toward a security guard, but it was too late. Robert had already taken the microphone. "Good evening," he said, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "I apologize for interrupting, but there's something everyone here needs to know." Cameras turned toward him. Journalists who moments ago had been bored suddenly perked up, sensing a story. "Vanessa Hale is being honored tonight for leadership," Robert continued. "But true leaders don't destroy families to protect their image. They don't bribe government officials to separate a child from his mother." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Vanessa's face hardened into a mask of fury. "I have evidence," Robert said, nodding toward Clara, who held up her phone, "that Ms. Hale paid a CPS worker to file a false complaint against Isabel Moreno, a woman whose only crime was loving the child I abandoned years ago." A shareholder Robert recognized stepped forward. "Langford, this is inappropriate. You're damaging the company's reputation even further." "Perhaps," Robert acknowledged, "but I won't be silent while an innocent woman and child suffer." Phones throughout the room lit up as the article about Isabel began trending. People read in real time about her struggles, her dignity, and her unwavering love for her son. Vanessa finally found her voice. "You're pathetic, Robert. Throwing away everything we built for some homeless woman and her brat." Robert stepped closer to her, away from the microphone, but the nearby journalists still caught his words. "I lost a company, not my soul," he said quietly. "You lost that long ago." Security finally arrived, escorting Robert toward the exit. As he passed the shareholders' table, the chairman stood up. "The board will need to meet immediately," he announced. "Mr. Langford, consider yourself temporarily relieved of your duties until this situation cools down." Robert nodded, accepting the cost of his actions. As Clara joined him at the door, he caught a glimpse of Vanessa's triumphant smirk. But for the first time in years, Robert Langford walked away from a business defeat, feeling like he'd finally won something that mattered. Few days, Robert stood in the empty living room of his new suburban home, surrounded by unpacked boxes and the echo of his own footsteps. Sunlight streamed through uncovered windows, casting long rectangles of light across the hardwood floors. It was a far cry from his penthouse with its panoramic city views and designer furniture. This place was modest: 3 bedrooms, a small yard, and neighbors close enough to hear their children playing outside. And that was exactly why he'd chosen it. "Need help with those boxes, Mr. Langford?" called Mark, his driver, from the doorway. "Just Robert now," he corrected gently. "And no, I've got it. Thanks for the ride." After Mark left, Robert opened a box labeled Essentials and pulled out a framed drawing, one of Mateo's creations showing 3 stick figures beneath a yellow sun. He placed it carefully on the mantel, the first decoration in his new home. The following morning, Robert parked his car outside Hope Haven, the shelter where Isabel and Mateo had once stayed. He'd traded his tailored suit for jeans and a simple button-down shirt. His hands felt clammy as he approached the front desk. "I'm here to volunteer," he told the woman at reception. "I called yesterday?" The volunteer director, a no-nonsense woman named Diane, gave him a quick tour. "Most of our volunteers want to work in the kitchen or donation center," she explained. "But we really need help with the kids program." "I'll do whatever's needed," Robert said quietly. By afternoon, he found himself sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by 5 boys between ages 6 and 10. They were building structures with donated Lego blocks, and Robert was helping them design what they called a super fort. "Higher," insisted a freckle-faced boy named Javier. "It's got to be taller than the bad guys." Robert smiled, carefully adding another level. "Like this?" "Perfect," Javier beamed. So absorbed was he in the children's game that Robert didn't notice Isabel standing in the doorway, watching. She'd come to drop off some of Mateo's outgrown clothes, never expecting to find Robert there. For several minutes, she observed him. This man she'd once known as ambitious and self-focused, now patiently helping children build imaginary worlds. His laugh was different somehow, lighter, more genuine than she remembered. When Robert finally looked up and saw her, surprise flickered across his face. He excused himself from the boys and walked over to her. "Isabel," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I didn't know you were coming." "I didn't know you'd be here," she replied, gesturing to the children. "This isn't exactly where I pictured Robert Langford spending his afternoons." He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly self-conscious. "I wanted to understand what you went through, what Mateo experienced." Isabel nodded, a complicated mix of emotions crossing her face. "I spoke with my lawyer this morning. The custody hearing is set for next Thursday." "I know," Robert said. "My lawyer called too." A small boy tugged at Robert's sleeve. "Mr. Rob, are you coming back to help us finish?" "Just a minute, Javier," Robert said gently. Isabel's expression softened slightly. "You're good with them." "I'm learning," he admitted. "Every day I'm learning." She hesitated, then added, "Mateo asked about you this morning. He wants to know if you'll call him tonight." Hope flickered in Robert's eyes. "I'd like that very much." The digital clock on Robert's laptop glowed 12:03 a.m. as he sat alone in his new living room. The house was quiet, too quiet, with only the occasional car passing outside to break the silence. A half-empty cup of cold coffee sat beside him, forgotten hours ago. Robert stared at his screen, scrolling through an old email account he hadn't opened in years. It was the one he'd used back when he and Isabel were together, before success and ambition had changed everything. He'd been searching for anything that might help at the custody hearing, any forgotten document or correspondence. Instead, he found something he wasn't prepared for. There in his drafts folder was a saved voicemail from Isabel, dated just 3 months after he'd left. He'd converted it to an audio file but never listened to it. His finger hovered over the play button, his heart pounding. He clicked. "Robert." Isabel's voice filled the room, sounding both younger and wearier than she did now. "I don't know if you'll ever hear this. I've called so many times and—" A pause, a shaky breath. "I'm not calling to make you feel guilty. I don't hate you. I just wish you'd been brave enough to stay." Robert's hand flew to his mouth, stifling a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. "There are things you should know," her voice continued. "Important things. But maybe it's better this way. Maybe some doors should stay closed. Take care of yourself, Robert." The message ended, leaving Robert in crushing silence. Tears streamed down his face as the weight of years of denial came crashing down. He'd told himself she was better off without him, that he'd done her a favor by leaving. But the truth was painfully clear. He'd been a coward. With trembling hands, he pulled a notebook from a nearby box and began to write. The words poured out of him, all the things he'd been too afraid to say, too ashamed to admit. "Dear Isabel and Mateo," he wrote. "There are no words that can undo the years of absence, the birthdays missed, the tears I caused. But I need to try anyway." He wrote about his shame, his regrets, how success had felt hollow without them. He wrote about seeing Mateo for the first time and feeling his heart crack open. He wrote about watching Isabel struggle and knowing it was his fault. And finally, he wrote about love, the love he'd run from, the love he'd never deserved, but the love he hoped, somehow, might still have a place in their lives. "I don't ask for forgiveness," he concluded. "I haven't earned it. But I promise you both this. I will spend every day trying to be worthy of the second chance you've given me. Not as the man I was, but as the father and partner I should have been all along." Miles away, in a modest apartment where Mateo slept peacefully, Isabel sat at a small kitchen table. A single candle flickered beside her, illuminating the pages in her hands. Robert's letter, delivered unexpectedly by Clara just hours before. "He never meant for you to see this," Clara had explained softly. "But I thought you should." Now alone in the gentle candlelight, Isabel read Robert's raw, unfiltered words. Silent tears tracked down her cheeks, dropping onto the paper and blurring the ink in places. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned each page, absorbing every confession, every promise, every regret. The courtroom was hushed as Judge Martinez adjusted her glasses, looking down at the small boy seated in the witness chair. Mateo's legs dangled above the floor, his Sunday shoes freshly polished but scuffed at the toes. He fidgeted with the collar of his button-up shirt, the nicest one he owned. "Mateo," the judge said gently, "I have a very important question for you. You don't need to worry about giving the right answer. I just want to know how you feel." She leaned forward slightly. "Who do you feel safest with?" Robert held his breath, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. Across the aisle, Isabel sat with perfect posture, her eyes never leaving her son. The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone in the room. Mateo looked first at his mother, then at Robert, his small face scrunched in concentration, as if he were solving a very difficult math problem. "My mommy makes me strong," he said finally, his voice clear despite its softness. "But my daddy helps me dream." A collective breath seemed to release throughout the courtroom. The court reporter's fingers paused briefly over her keyboard. Judge Martinez's expression softened. Isabel covered her mouth with her hand, tears welling in her eyes. Robert stared at Mateo in wonder. This child who somehow understood something that had taken him nearly 4 decades to learn, that people need both safety and dreams to truly live. The judge nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you, Mateo. You may return to your seat now." As proceedings continued, Isabel's lawyer stood to make her final statement, but Isabel touched her arm and whispered something. The lawyer looked surprised, then nodded and sat down. Isabel rose to her feet. "Your Honor, may I speak directly to the court?" Judge Martinez considered this unusual request, then nodded. "You may." "I've spent years protecting my son," Isabel began, her voice steady despite her obvious emotion. "I've gone hungry so he could eat. I've stayed awake so he could sleep safely. I've carried him when I could barely stand myself." She paused, gathering her courage. "But I've realized something important. Mateo deserves everything good in this world, including his father." She turned slightly toward Robert. "I don't want to take Mateo away from Robert. Instead, I'm asking for joint custody. We can co-parent, for Mateo's sake." Robert's eyes widened in disbelief. After everything he'd done, after all the pain he'd caused, Isabel was offering him a gift he never expected. Judge Martinez studied Isabel carefully. "Are you certain this is what you want, Ms. Moreno?" "Yes, Your Honor," Isabel answered without hesitation. "Mateo needs both of us." The judge looked between the two parents, seeing something that perhaps neither of them fully recognized yet. The beginning of forgiveness, of healing. "Very well," Judge Martinez said. "Given the circumstances and the clear love both parties have demonstrated for the child, I am granting joint guardianship." She tapped her gavel. "Court is adjourned." As people began to file out, Robert and Isabel's eyes met across the aisle. No words passed between them, but something profound did, an acknowledgement of how deeply they had both changed. Outside in the courthouse hallway, Clara approached Robert and wrapped him in a tight hug. "I'm proud of you," she whispered, then pulled back to look him in the eyes. "Now go earn that title, Dad." The soft light of morning filtered through the windows of Isabel's small apartment. 3 bowls sat on the table, one empty, one half-finished, and one still full of cereal slowly turning soggy. A calendar hung on the refrigerator door, covered with colorful markers noting Dad's Day and Mom's Day and family dinner in alternating patterns. "Mateo, have you brushed your teeth?" Isabel called, stuffing homework papers into a folder. "Yes," came the reply from down the hall, followed by the patter of small feet racing toward the door. This was their new normal. 3 months had passed since the courthouse, and the awkward dance of co-parenting had gradually found its rhythm. Not perfect, but theirs. The doorbell rang and Mateo rushed to answer it. "Dad!" he exclaimed, throwing his arms around Robert's legs. Robert knelt down, his suit pants creasing at the knees. "Hey, buddy. Ready for school?" "Uh-huh. I finished my science project. Want to see?" "In the car, Mateo," Isabel said, appearing with his backpack. "You'll be late." She offered Robert a small smile. "He's been talking about showing you all morning." Robert nodded, feeling the warmth that came with being expected, being wanted. "I'll have him back by 7, he said. "After ice cream." "Ice cream!" Mateo pumped his fist. Isabel raised an eyebrow. "After dinner," she corrected, but her tone was light. As they walked to the car, Robert felt a deep contentment wash over him. This simple moment, taking his son to school, was worth more than all the business deals he'd ever closed. The weekend brought sunshine and art supplies spread across Robert's dining table. Mateo's tongue poked out in concentration as he painted what might have been a dinosaur, or possibly a very lumpy horse. "That's beautiful," Isabel said, leaning over his shoulder. "It's for Dad's office," Mateo explained, "so he remembers us when he's working." Robert, who'd been washing brushes at the sink, felt his heart squeeze. "I always remember you, buddy." Later, as Mateo napped on the couch, Robert and Isabel sat on the porch steps, mugs of coffee warming their hands. "He's happy," Isabel said softly. "Are you?" Robert asked, the question hanging between them. She considered this. "Getting there," she finally answered, honest as always. The following Thursday, Robert picked them up in his car, unusually secretive about their destination. "Just a little detour before dinner," he said, driving them out of the city. The road curved through rolling hills until they reached a field of sunflowers, their bright faces turned toward the fading sun. At the edge of the field stood a 2-story farmhouse with a wide porch and fresh white paint. "What is this place?" Isabel asked as they got out of the car. Robert led them up the gravel path, Mateo running ahead to explore. "It needs some work inside," he admitted, "but the foundation is solid." He pulled a key from his pocket, its brass surface catching the sunlight. "It's not a mansion, but it's a home, if you want it." Isabel stared at the key, then at the house with its weathered charm and sunflower backdrop. "You bought this?" she whispered. "For Mateo, for us, for whatever shape our family takes." Robert placed the key in her palm. "No pressure, just an option." Tears welled in Isabel's eyes as she closed her fingers around the key. "It's all I've ever dreamed of." The pale golden light of dawn crept through the windows of the farmhouse kitchen. Robert stood at the stove, still getting used to where everything was kept in this new space. He'd arrived extra early, wanting to surprise Mateo with a special breakfast. "Dad, you're here already!" Mateo's voice rang out as he bounded into the kitchen in dinosaur pajamas, hair sticking up in all directions. "Thought we could make some pancakes," Robert said, holding up a mixing bowl. "Want to help?" Mateo's eyes lit up. "Can we make them shaped like animals?" "We can try," Robert laughed, pulling a chair to the counter so Mateo could reach. Soon, the kitchen filled with giggles as flour dusted their clothes and faces. Mateo accidentally flipped a pancake too enthusiastically, sending it flying across the room and landing with a splat on the floor. They doubled over in laughter, Robert's deep chuckle mixing with Mateo's high-pitched giggles. "What's so funny in here?" Isabel appeared in the doorway, her hair tied back loosely, holding a steaming pot of coffee. "Dad can't flip pancakes," Mateo announced, pointing to the floor. "I see that," Isabel said, a peaceful smile spreading across her face. She set the coffee pot down and grabbed paper towels. "Good thing we have plenty of batter left." There was something different about her smile these days, something genuine that reached her eyes. The wariness that had once shadowed her expression was fading, little by little. They sat down at the small kitchen table together, a family enjoying misshapen pancakes drizzled with maple syrup. No tension hung in the air, no forced politeness, just the comfortable warmth of 3 people finding their way together. After breakfast, they wandered outside to explore the sunflower field stretching behind the house. The tall stalks created natural pathways, and Mateo ran ahead, weaving between the massive yellow blooms. "This is our magic forest," he called back to them, his voice floating through the golden maze. Robert watched him disappear and reappear between the sunflowers, his heart full. "Sunshine Cottage," he murmured to himself, deciding then and there what he would call their new home. Beside him, Isabel clutched a large envelope. "Is that what I think it is?" Robert asked, nodding toward it. She nodded. "My children's story. Clara found a publisher who's willing to look at it." "That's wonderful," Robert said, genuinely proud. "I always knew you were meant to write." "I'm terrified," she admitted, "but it feels right." "Mom, Dad, come see what I found." Mateo's voice called from deep in the sunflowers. They exchanged a glance, then followed the sound of their son's voice into their magic forest. In the days that followed, Robert spent his afternoons in the backyard, struggling with wood planks and a toolbox he barely knew how to use. The half-built treehouse clung to the sturdy oak tree, looking more like an abstract art piece than a child's hideaway. "You're supposed to hit the nail, not your thumb," Mateo giggled, sitting cross-legged on the grass and watching Robert nurse another minor injury. "I'm learning as I go," Robert admitted, shaking his sore hand. He'd built tech empires but couldn't seem to master a simple hammer. Mateo climbed up the ladder and inspected his father's work. "You're not a builder," he said thoughtfully, then broke into a wide smile. "But you're my best try." Robert's heart swelled at those simple words. He ruffled Mateo's hair and promised, "It'll be the best crooked treehouse in the whole neighborhood." Inside the house, Isabel stood frozen by the kitchen table, a letter trembling in her hands. She read it again, making sure she hadn't misunderstood. "They want to publish it," she whispered to herself. "They actually want to publish my story." The doorbell rang, pulling her from her daze. Clara stood on the porch, holding a package with a mysterious smile. "Special delivery," Clara announced, stepping inside. "I pulled some strings to get an advance copy." She handed Isabel a beautifully bound children's book. On the cover, a little boy in a yellow raincoat stood beneath a stormy sky, with sunbeams breaking through the clouds. The title read, "Sunshine in Stormy Skies." "It's beautiful," Isabel breathed, running her fingers over her name printed on the cover. That evening, after dinner, Robert sat in Mateo's bedroom with the book in his hands. "Tonight's bedtime story is extra special," he said, as Mateo snuggled under his dinosaur blanket. As Robert read about a brave little boy who never lost hope through difficult times, Mateo's eyes grew wider with each page turn. "That's me," he exclaimed suddenly, pointing at the illustrations. "The boy is me." The local library had invited Isabel to speak at their community outreach program for single parents. She stood in front of her bedroom mirror, nervously smoothing her simple blue dress. "You look beautiful," Robert said from the doorway. "They're going to love you." Isabel tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm not sure what I have to offer them." "Everything," Robert replied simply. "Your strength, your story." "I'll watch Mateo," he added. "We've got big plans to finish that treehouse today. Don't worry about a thing." The library meeting room was filled with women of all ages, some with the tired eyes Isabel knew too well. As she stepped up to the podium, her hands trembled slightly. 3 years ago, she began, her voice growing steadier. "I was sleeping in a shelter with my son. Today I'm a published author." She paused, looking at the faces watching her. "My story isn't about tragedy, it's about survival and second chances." She shared her journey without self-pity, the nights of hunger, the endless job applications, the moments she'd almost given up, but also the small victories. Mateo's first drawing, finding a safe place to sleep, the day she submitted her story. "The hardest lesson I learned," Isabel said, her voice catching, "is that forgiveness isn't just for others, it's for yourself too." As she concluded, she smiled gently at the women before her. Love doesn't always knock twice, but when it does, open the door. Back at home, Robert and Mateo hammered the last board onto the treehouse floor. Mateo proudly held up a handmade sign painted in bright colors. "Mateo's Sky Fort, Daddy's Tools Only." "Perfect," Robert laughed, helping him nail it to the door. When Isabel's car pulled into the driveway, the sound of their laughter drifted down from the branches. She stood beneath the tree, looking up at her son and the man who had found his way back to them. "Mom, come see," Mateo called down excitedly. As she climbed the wobbly ladder, her heart felt impossibly full, not with the pain of the past, but with the joy of the present. The weekend sun poured down like honey, warming the checkered blanket where Robert, Isabel, and Mateo had spread their picnic. They'd chosen a spot beneath a sprawling oak tree in the community park, not far from their new home. Children's laughter floated on the breeze as families enjoyed the perfect Saturday afternoon. Mateo sat cross-legged between his parents, munching on a peanut butter sandwich cut into triangles, just the way he liked it. "I made something," he announced suddenly, wiping his hands on his jeans. Isabel smiled. "What is it, sweetheart?" Mateo reached into his little backpack and pulled out a carefully folded piece of paper. He smoothed it out with his small hands, revealing a colorful drawing done in bright crayons. The picture showed 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a brilliant yellow sun and towering sunflowers. The tallest figure wore a blue shirt like Robert's favorite. The middle one had long brown hair like Isabel's, and the smallest wore a red cap, Mateo's trademark. Above them, written in wobbly letters, were the words, "The day my daddy found us." Isabel's eyes filled with tears as she studied the drawing. Robert went completely still beside her. "Do you like it?" Mateo asked, his eyes hopeful. "Oh, Mateo," Isabel whispered, leaning forward to kiss his forehead. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Robert cleared his throat, clearly fighting emotion. "It's perfect, buddy, absolutely perfect." A local artist sketching nearby smiled at the touching scene, while other parkgoers continued their activities around them, unaware of the profound moment unfolding on the checkered blanket. When they returned home, Robert immediately found a simple wooden frame in his office. With careful hands, he placed Mateo's drawing inside and hung it in the living room, right where everyone could see it when they walked through the front door. As evening settled over their home and Mateo played in his room, Robert and Isabel stood side by side on the back porch, watching fireflies begin to dance across the yard. Robert took a deep breath and gently reached for Isabel's hand. His fingers trembled slightly as they intertwined with hers. "I don't know what the future holds," he said softly, his voice steady despite his nerves. "But I'd be honored to keep walking through it with you." Isabel's fingers traced the faded ink on the yellowed notebook page. She'd found her old recipe journal while unpacking some boxes in their new home. The handwriting belonged to a different Isabel, younger, more hopeful, less weathered by life. She paused at a simple recipe for a sandwich spread, and memories washed over her like a gentle wave. The scene shifted in her mind to 12 years earlier, a cramped studio apartment with peeling wallpaper and a window that never quite closed properly. Robert sat on the threadbare couch, staring at job rejection emails on his ancient laptop. His stomach growled loudly enough for her to hear from the tiny kitchenette. "I'm fine," he'd insisted, too proud to admit he was hungry. "I'll grab something later." But Isabel knew there was no food later. Their cupboards were as empty as their bank account. She'd been saving her lunch for after her evening shift, but seeing Robert's hollow cheeks, she made a decision. She pulled out her sandwich wrapped in wax paper, simple but made with care. Egg salad with a sprinkle of paprika and fresh dill. She cut it in half and sat beside him. "Here," she said, offering him the larger portion. "I can't take your food," Robert protested. Isabel simply smiled and placed it in his hands. "We may not have much, but we have each other." Back in the present, Isabel gathered the ingredients: eggs, mayonnaise, dill, and paprika. The kitchen in their new home was modest but filled with morning light. As she worked, she could hear Mateo and Robert laughing in the living room, the sound warming her more than the sunshine streaming through the windows. When lunch was ready, she called her boys to the table. "What's this?" Robert asked, eyeing the sandwich halves arranged on their plates. "Just something from a long time ago," Isabel replied with a soft smile. Robert took a bite and closed his eyes. Recognition dawned on his face, not just of the taste, but of the memory it carried. He swallowed and looked at Isabel, his eyes glistening. "This tastes like hope," he said quietly. Mateo, oblivious to the deeper meaning, happily munched his sandwich between them. Their tiny kitchen table, unlike the lonely meals of their past, now rang with Mateo's stories about school and Robert's gentle teasing. Laughter, not silence, filled the air around them. As evening approached, Robert, Isabel, and Mateo walked hand in hand down the busy city street. The familiar buildings and bustling sidewalks held different memories for each of them, but one corner in particular drew them like a magnet. "Can we stop here?" Mateo asked, tugging gently on their hands. They paused at the traffic light where their lives had collided months ago. Cars rushed by, the world continuing its hurried pace around their quiet moment of reflection. Mateo's eyes lit up with recognition. He pointed to the exact spot on the sidewalk and looked up at Robert. "That's where I told you Mommy said I should call you Daddy," he said, his voice clear and certain. Robert felt his throat tighten. He knelt down on one knee, bringing himself to Mateo's eye level. The boy's face, so much like his own, gazed back at him with innocent wisdom. "And that's the day I finally listened," Robert replied softly, his voice thick with emotion. Isabel watched them, her eyes glistening in the golden sunset light. She pulled out her phone and asked a passing stranger to take their photo. The three stood together on that meaningful corner, Mateo in the middle holding both their hands tightly. Behind them, the sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, as if nature itself was celebrating their journey. Later that evening, Robert carefully hung Mateo's drawing, "The Day My Daddy Found Us," in a place of honor above the fireplace in Sunshine Cottage. The simple frame couldn't contain the love that radiated from the childish lines and bright colors. If you enjoyed the story of Robert, Isabel, and Mateo, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. If you enjoyed the story of Robert, Isabel, and Mateo, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.